Well, salutations, fellow vidiots. Welcome back to yet another episode of that Full Moon Madness, baby. So, sticking with our established routine, since our previous episode covered a movie that I was familiar with, this episode covers one that I'm not so familiar with. Even though I did see it at the video store fucking constantly, you couldn't escape this tape back in the day. There was always a couple of copies of it in like every video store that no one ever fucking rented, and I'm pretty sure that was for good reason. I do enjoy this movie. I don't love it, but I also don't hate it. It mostly just seems like an exercise in squandered potential, and probably would have been a lot better had they given the dude more money. We'll talk more about that as we go. But, you know, obviously our movie for today is The Dead Hate the Living. This came out in the year 2000. And it's pretty much a fucking artifact of that time period. It's dated as a motherfucker, and not in a good way. But it's still got some cool stuff in there. Hopefully we can make a case for you guys at least giving it a watch once. Probably not one you'll revisit frequently, though. I could see myself watching it again on mute with, like, some early 2000s industrial metal playing over top of it. Anyway, enough yammering. Let's jump into the shit here and see what we can see. The Dead Hate the Living was written and directed by Dave Parker. It was produced by Charles Band and Dana Scanlon. It stars Eric Clausen, Jamie Donahue, Brett Beardsley, and Matt Stevens. It mostly has music by the bands Penis Flytrap and Haunted Garage, but it also has some music in there by Jared DePasquale and Michael Saunier. It's got cinematography by Thomas L. Calloway. It was distributed by Multicom Entertainment and Full Moon, and it was released on February 8th of 2000. Little Valentine's Day special for you guys here. It is kind of a love story. The basic gist of The Dead Hate the Living is you have a group of young independent filmmakers that have broken into an abandoned hospital. Just so happens it's the hospital set from the movie End of Days that was repurposed for the shoot here. Anyway, they've broken into this hospital to shoot illegally in there their low-budget zombie movie. Just so happens that there was like a mad scientist guy apparently doing some research on how to use like this interdimensional gizmo that he's created here that somehow tapped into the land of the dead to resurrect his dead wife. I believe she died of cancer. It got out of hand. He ended up, killing himself and sealing himself in the box. Not quite sure how he managed that. And through their explorations while filming their low-budget splatter flick, they end up running across this gizmo, which is basically just a really big, awesome, ornate coffin hooked up to some gadgets, like some computers and probably old hospital equipment. Maybe a fax machine or two. Anyway, they end up stumbling across this guy, and they have to figure out, should they, report this dead body to the police, or should they use it and his sweet collection of gadgets and grotesqueries in their movie. They end up settling on the latter, accidentally activating this fucking gizmo, which not only resurrects him, but allows him to bring forth his army of the dead, which is really just like two dudes and then a couple other people he converts into zombies later to wreak havoc on their film shoot, kill off most of their friends, and eventually force them to flee into this death realm where they encounter some really fucking bad screensaver quality CGI. This movie's not great. I wouldn't even call it good. It is a hell of a lot of fun, though. And the story behind it makes it an interesting little piece of Full Moon history. Basically, the writer and director, Dave Parker, was just a dude who worked in Full Moon's marketing department for years. He edited a lot of the trailers that we've come to know and love. He put together a lot of the Video Zone segments. I think he directed a fair amount of those. And he'd tried his hand at a music video or two, but he'd wanted to make his own feature film for years, so Full Moon regular Dave Dakota got to talking to him about this, and he decided he was going to put in the good word to Charlie Band. Long story short, Dave ended up getting to make his little passion project of a movie, and a lot of it is autobiographical. It's got pieces of his life and his assistants and his friends kind of in there. There are characters in the movie that are playing a version of these real-life people, and that makes it pretty fun. And they're very upfront about the fact that even if people didn't like it, at least they got to make it, right? It very much feels like a horror movie made by horror fans for horror fans, and on many levels, it succeeds at being that. It just fails on several pretty important levels when it comes to being a successful, splatter movie. Mainly, I think they just ran out of money. And it also tries a little too hard to be a horror comedy. There is elements of the comedy that really works, and I wouldn't want the movie without it. And then there's a lot of elements of the comedy that just don't work. Thankfully, you could make a much funnier cut of this movie by just removing those instances, because most of them happen when nothing's really going on. It's just excess humor for the sake of having, like, another lame joke in there. Outside of that, I guess you could say, like, the meta stuff works pretty good. I do like all the different references to other horror movies, horror icons, famous character actors. All that stuff's done pretty well and timed pretty properly throughout the course of the movie. The set design, even though they did repurpose a set, was pretty fucking awesome. They built a really cool cemetery set for their movie that ended up working for the same purposes in the context of this one. I do like that it was like a different way of creating these zombies. It's like this interdimensional box instead of just being, you know, your standard virus or contagion or whatever you want to call it. The character design on the dead things, the zombies, if you want to call them that, they don't really behave like normal zombies, and no one turns into the zombie by getting scratched or bitten. You have to be put in the box and reanimated. But anyways, the design on the zombies themselves, for lack of a better word, is fucking awesome. I especially like Doc, the big bald, like, buff Cenobite face zombie. Our main dude, the Mad Dr. Ebon, looks pretty fucking cool. And I do think it's extra hilarious that we got Matthew McGrory, who played Tiny in House of a Thousand Corpses, up in here playing next to his low-rent Rob Zombie looking ass. Not 3 years later, he'd be in a movie shot by the real Rob Zombie, not the Spirit Halloween version. At the end of the day, I kind of stand by what I said in the intro. It's just one of those movies. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's pretty fun for what it is. It's worth watching at least once. It feels like it tries a little too hard in certain areas and didn't try hard enough, or didn't have the means to try hard enough in other areas. But that stuff aside, it still manages to crank out some good scenes, some really cool atmosphere. I mean, the whole vibe of the movie is pretty solid. And it's definitely one that I would recommend people see at least once. Because the stuff in it that's good is good, and the stuff in it that's bad is fucking hilarious. I mean, you saw that lightning fucking Tiny up in the end of that clip there. This is no joke. Some really good fire scenes as well, and when they finally walk into the netherworld or whatever, trust me, it's a visual spectacle, to say the least. I guess I would say I kind of wish that I had gotten around to renting this back in the day, because I probably would have appreciated it a ton more when I was 12, back when it first came out, than I do now. That aside, though, anything you could say bad or good about this movie as a cool piece of full moon history and as a passion project made flesh, it's a super interesting conversation piece, to say the very least. I don't know, man. I mean, this is solid middle-of-the-road shit, I guess. Check it out if you have the time. Don't go out of your way. I mean, it is available on Tubi, so you wouldn't have to go too far to find it. Maybe, slide it down the priority list, as I recommend better movies to you guys, and then just check it out eventually. Or wait like 20 years like I did. That's all we got on The Dead Hate the Living. We are going to be coming back at you guys here real soon with a double feature of proto-full moon flicks, I guess we'll call them. Stuff that they did before they established the company, maybe in the Empire days, maybe just before, or in the interim between the two. I pretty much consider all that stuff still full moon. So, cheers, thanks for watching, we'll see you back here real soon.